Good morning and welcome to Ask the Expert. I'm Joe Taylor. This morning, another in the ongoing series of programs presented by the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning. The program, through the Northwest Institute of Research, oversees a grant from the Office of Child Development and Early Learning at the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. The goal of the program is to improve the outcomes for young children as they prepare for school. John Posa from the Pennsylvania Key is the host of the program and is with us throughout the series. And who's with us on the phone this morning, John?
Good morning, Joe. This morning we have Della Moran, who is a consultant at Research for Action, which is a Philadelphia-based nonprofit with 25 years of experience in education policy research and program evaluation. Della supports RFA projects centered on childcare and early education and is the lead author of RFA's most recent report, Childcare Funding and Finance in Pennsylvania, Budgeting for Survival or Paying for the Cost of True Quality. Welcome to the program, Della.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Well, the first thing I wanted to ask regarding your research study on childcare funding and finance in Pennsylvania was, how did it actually originate, including where did the funding come from to help support the research?
Sure. So this research came about as part of RFA's efforts to focus even more on our very youngest learners, our children from birth to 5, and how they're currently being served in the Commonwealth. Thanks to advances in neuroscience and decades of research, we know how important those first years are for child development and for their future success in school and beyond. So we know the majority of children spend time in out-of-home childcare before entering school. But unlike public schools, we know very little about how childcare centers are funded and whether the funding they receive is adequate to allow for high-quality care. So the research really came about from RFA's interest in digging more into this research question. We knew it was also of interest to leaders at Octel. And the project was generously funded by the Heinz Endowment. And our research dissemination, so going out and getting this research in the hands of important stakeholders, was funded by the BUILD initiative.
Okay, I see. So now I couldn't help but, catch the subheading of the research report, Budgeting for Survival or Paying for the Cost of True Quality. So what did you mean actually by that phrasing?
I think the question we were trying to get at here is, are child care centers able to make decisions about programming, about upgrades to their facilities, about how to pay their staff and who to hire based on what they know is best for kids and true quality, or are they limited by lack of funding? And so what we found is that even some of the best centers in the Commonwealth are really limited financially and struggling to make ends meet. So they're, in our words, they're budgeting for survival. They're month to month. And this was true of a cross-section of childcare centers we looked at that spanned different corners of the Commonwealth, some that were rural, some that were suburban, and some that were urban.
Is the average cost of childcare out of reach of many young families in the state, particularly those families that either don't qualify for the child care work subsidy or are on a subsidy waiting list? Because we hear so often that it's cost prohibitive for many families.
Yeah, unfortunately it really is. The average cost of center-based childcare for one infant in Pennsylvania is more than the cost of tuition and fees at a four-year public college. So that is a lot of money for any family. It's, for the average family of 4 with 2 kids, an infant and a 4-year-old, which is a common scenario for young families, that child care cost is going to be more than a quarter of their annual income. So, even for a middle-class family, that is really hard to afford. And the challenge is worse for lower-income Pennsylvanians. We've seen research from our colleagues at the Economic Policy Institute that for a worker earning minimum wage, they would need to work for a full 9 months, January to September, just to pay for childcare for an infant at the average cost. So, for the 14,000 kids who are right now on the childcare subsidy waiting list, for those families, there's really not a sustainable way to afford childcare without help from the state.
Governor Wolf's budget seemed to be very generous regarding early childhood education funding. What are your thoughts on that? Is it enough?
I think that the governor has been very generous, and the legislature, both sides of the political coin, are really investing in early learning. I think that's fabulous. We have seen improvements and investments in getting children off the waiting list and in expanding pre-K programs. I don't think it has been enough simply because we still have so many children on waiting lists. And I think the often forgotten piece, too, is for the children that do qualify, the reimbursement rates that providers receive to pay for those children have been very low and have actually been frozen for over 10 years. So even the programs where we are investing and where we are supporting low-income children getting into childcare, we're not reimbursing childcare centers for what it really costs them to provide that care. That's a problem.
Have you found that because of the cost of childcare, a greater number of parents have chosen to stay at home with their children while their spouse works, or are they making that choice more out of a personal or long-standing belief? This is often in the more rural, maybe traditional families, rather than a financial one, that a child learns best from their parents and should therefore be at home prior to school. Did you find out one way or the other in your research about the decisions that a lot of parents are making and why they're making that decision?
That's a great question. Our research didn't address the choices that parents are making and why they make those choices. What I can say is that certainly parents are children's first teachers, whether they stay at home all day or whether they have children in childcare some of the time. So I think it's extremely important that we talk to parents about what they can do with their children at home to help with their development and support early learning. We do know, though, that currently 2/3 of Pennsylvania families that have children under 6 have either both parents working in the workforce or are part of a single-parent family where that parent works. So childcare is certainly an issue that affects a lot of Pennsylvania.
Now, what did your research find then on because we always hear the word quality, and I don't think a lot of parents really can identify what quality is. So, what was the belief and perception that you found as far as whether it was accurate, whether what they perceived as quality was accurate, and if it wasn't in some cases, were they told what true quality meant, and how did they react?
Mm-hmm. So we did not interview parents for this study, but I think that what you're suggesting is a really good idea for another study that I would love to do. I think it's really important that we talk more with parents about what they perceive to be quality, and that we make sure that we're letting them know how the state defines quality and why. So, our focus was on the providers, and we were defining quality as based on Keystone Stars, which is the state's quality ratings and improvement system.
Right.
So we were defining it as star 3 or 4, and that's based on things like having a safe and engaging classroom environment and facilities. It's also really based on the qualifications of the teaching staff and their curriculum implementation. And what we've seen in the research is that really the quality of the teacher and the quality of the interactions between the child and the adults in their environment is what drives learning and happy kids. So I think that is something that we can talk more to parents about, is how important that teacher-child bond is. And in my experience, talking with parents, they see that and they really value that teacher in their kid's life.
We are in a rural area, a little city in a rural area. I want to talk about the affordability of childcare, and is there a disparity, not in the cost of childcare, given that the cost of living, tends to go up in big cities, wages go up in big cities, but is there a disparity in the affordability of childcare, rural versus urban?
So I have not seen data on that question. I think that we have seen that across the Commonwealth there is a challenge with affording childcare, whether you're in a rural community or an urban community. And I don't know if there's some variation there. what we did see some variation in our study, we focused heavily on, the finances of providers and what they were doing to manage and become sustainable. And one thing that many centers talked about was the challenge of attracting and retaining high-quality staff with the wages they were able to pay. And this challenge of finding people who were qualified for the positions to do that really important role that we just talked about of being the primary interaction with kids and building those relationships with kids. Rural providers especially struggle with finding qualified staff with the wages they're able to pay. So that was one thing that we identified as significant in rural communities.
It was not only, I'm sure, significant in rural communities, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty much an issue across the board with childcare, the disparity in in how the teaching staff are paid, is it not?
Yes, absolutely, John. We found that all of the providers we spoke with had a challenge there, and part of that is really that childcare teachers with bachelor's degrees are paid far less than what their counterparts in elementary schools who teach kindergarten. So among the centers we spoke with, those people were paid 35 to 71% less than if they had a job with their local school district. And that's a real challenge, and it really comes back to one of our major findings in the report, which was that for infants and toddlers, child care works, the reimbursement that centers are receiving from the state for low-income infants and toddlers in care, that subsidy was actually bringing in less revenue per infant than they had to spend by 38%, so over a third.
Significant.
And so really when I see that, I see an unsustainable revenue gap there, and it's severely contributing to this challenge of compensating teachers well and driving turnover when teachers can really find better opportunities both at their local school district, but also, we heard some anecdotes about folks, leaving their childcare position to take jobs in hotels or at McDonald's because, wages are really, really low in the field.
I know. And of course, the rate at which Pennsylvania provides funding for the child care work subsidy, that hasn't changed in quite a long time. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the funding rates, the base rates for reimbursement for child care works have been frozen for over 10 years.
Right.
So, that hasn't even kept up with the cost of inflation for those centers and for what they receive versus what they have to pay.
Yeah, and many child care centers, and this isn't even a rural versus urban issue, depend on the child care work subsidy because of lower income families, qualifying for the subsidy, and that's a big part of what they depend on as part of their operation. I also wanted to ask you, and overall, what were some of the most surprising things you found out from the report and the research, both positive and negative, about and things that parents can really learn from, and overall, from that experience, what do you hope that the work will accomplish?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was surprised, frankly, that child care centers that serve a large amount of low-income children on child care work subsidy were able to stay in business at all. And really that's it's a negative and a positive, I guess. They're operating on such tight margins because of those reimbursement rates being low and having not changed in so long, that I think if the states want parents to be able to stay employed and to have access to child care, they have a real interest in those small businesses, those child care centers staying open and keeping kids safe and learning. So I was surprised just by the sheer ability of these businesses to keep providing high-quality care despite these challenges. And the research suggests that we really need to raise those rates ASAP. But I found the work that the centers were doing inspiring. The women, and it is primarily women who run these small businesses, are really devoted to children and devoted to quality. So I was surprised just by their sheer will to keep going despite a challenging business model. And I was also surprised, frankly, by the lack of data that we have as a state on child care funding and finance. And I don't think that's unique to Pennsylvania. In my experience, it's a challenge across the country that really we don't have a whole lot of information collected. We have a lot of data that child care centers collect, but not a lot on finance. And it's something that I think if we could build some more state capacity to have more information there, we might be able to drive some better policy decisions and present that evidence to legislators in getting more money to raise rates.
You're making a very interesting connection that I don't know that we make on this program or guests have made on the program in the past. Usually, I mean, the program, the premise of the program is talking about early childhood education, the beneficiary being obviously the child. But the connection that you've made is that this also affects the economy of our state, because if we cannot have women and families putting their children in early childhood education centers that they can afford, if there's no childhood, if there's no help, if there's no place for the kid to go, that person cannot work. They're out of the economy, and they're getting social services. How do you get that across to legislators, to the government, who say, well, we're spending enough money on these kids? No, it's not just on the kids.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is precisely really one of the goals I have, one of the hopes I have with this research is that we can continue to inform policymakers about the way in which child care subsidy and other early education public dollars both support the healthy development of our kids, which, of course, they're our most precious resource, but also definitely support our economy. I think our economy relies on child care these days, just with the sheer number of families that, by necessity, need to have both parents in the workforce. And I think we need to continue to message what we see in the research, which is that, low-income parents cannot stay productive and in the workforce and off of public assistance without affordable child care. And every parent, wants their kid to be safe and happy when they're not in their care and have that reassurance. So parents are not going to be productive members of the workforce unless they have a safe place to leave their kids during the day.
Absolutely. We're speaking with Della Moran, consultant with Research for Action, and her new research report, Child Care Funding and Finance in Pennsylvania, Budgeting for Survival or Paying for the Cost of True Quality. Della, we also have heard through various research outlets about the so-called child care deserts that are throughout the country, including in Pennsylvania. When I say desert, is there still these large pockets of primarily rural, but not even so, areas that are not so rural, where there is a lack of child care, or at least a lack of access to child care. So I guess the question is, not only are we finding it difficulty for those who are in this business to financially sustain themselves, but the fact is, not only because there is a need, there's a problem in even having enough of them. Did your research look at that aspect as well?
This particular study did not look at that. We were focusing on the child care centers that do exist, and actually really on the ones that are already high quality, so they have the capacity to be Star 3 or Star 4.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. There are communities in the Commonwealth where there is not access to a Star 3 or Star 4 center, and there may be even limited access to child care at all, especially in rural areas where parents are driving a long way to find that care. So certainly I think, this research didn't address it, but past research has definitively shown that we need to focus on capacity building in child care as well, especially in those child care deserts, as you mentioned.
In your research, because as we know that this is a workforce and an economic development issue, so, obviously businesses are impacted, especially businesses that employ folks who have preschool children, and whether the cost of that child care is prohibitive for those employees. And it can create an issue and a problem, in terms of the employee and having that access. So, did you find any comments from the centers that you work with the folks about any difficulties that some of their clients were having, with just being able to pay and a problem with the parents, with the employer?
We didn't focus heavily on that issue, but it's certainly a big one. I think that employers and businesses in general sometimes forget how essential childcare is to their business succeeding and their employees showing up every day. And I think that it's interesting. There are some really wonderful organizations across the state who are working to engage business leaders more on this topic. One that comes to mind is the Early Learning Investment Commission, ELIC.
Right.
And so we've worked with them in the past to help promote this research and to really make sure that it gets in the hands of the business leaders who are, able to have a voice on this topic and also really able to think about the implications for their employees. The other thing I would say is that, of course, we've touched on this before, but childcare providers are small businesses, many of them. Some are nonprofit, some are for-profit, but all are relatively small businesses, and they employ people in our communities. And I think, going back again to the compensation question, we spoke with some providers who had employees who themselves, because of their salary, would qualify for childcare work, for assistance with their own children being in childcare. So that, to me, really just reinforces the importance of thinking about the early education workforce and how we make sure that we provide centers with adequate funding to compensate their teachers well, because they really, as a small business, have the capability, if they had enough funding, to keep their own employees off of public benefits and to provide their own employees with a living wage and support for their own kids. So it's a big circle in my mind.
Yeah. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of ask you as we're wrapping up here. We're now with this report out. Obviously, you're going to use this research, I'm sure, in ways to have some positive, influential impact. And what's the next step now after you've completed this? What do you hope to do with the research?
Yeah, good question. So we're out there talking about the research. I think Research for Action sees that as one really important piece of research, which is sometimes left out, right? Sometimes researchers publish papers and then kind of wait for people to come read them. And Research for Action puts an emphasis on stakeholder engagement and disseminating our research so that it can be used in policymaking. And so we're out there presenting this to different stakeholders and hoping to get it in the hands of people who are working with the legislature to make better decisions about investing in early learning. So I think as researchers, we ourselves are not direct advocates, but we certainly provide information to those who are, and I hope that they can take this research and help to inform policymaking at the state level.
Thank you so much, Della. Your work is just very thorough. I was really pleased and very enlightened by the study. Childcare funding and finance in Pennsylvania, budgeting for survival or paying for the cost of true quality. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our program for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks at this same time. In the meantime, you can go online to learn more at papromiseforchildren.com. For John Posa and the Northwest Regional Key Program for Quality Early Learning, I'm Joe Taylor. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.